In today's rapidly evolving world, fleet operators face two challenges: the urgent need to decarbonise their operations and the constant imperative to enhance safety. But the good news is that by turning raw data into actionable insights, we can tackle both of these challenges head on. And today we'll hear first from Richard Parker, the EV guru at Webfleet, about connecting safety and sustainability themes before explaining more about how those two things come together with Webfleet, concluding with the importance of collaboration. And then we'll hear from Nick Rogers from Eurora Group, who comes with insights on transport management, system planning and operational perspectives, particularly addressing Scope 3 emissions. Look forward to that one. And once we've had the presentations, Paul and I will try and manage a panel session with Richard and Nick, and they'll be joined by Niall Riddell from Paua and Angus Webb of DYNAMON. And there'll be an opportunity to ask your questions at the end. So please drop a question for the panel in the Q&A tab at the bottom of this page. So on your screen, right at the bottom, you'll see there's the Q&A tab. Throw in any questions you've got for the panel there. Any general chat that you want to have, you can do that on the right-hand side in the chat box. But questions for the panel, stick them in the Q&A. We'll pick those up right at the end. Right. Everybody happy? Shall we proceed? Right. It's 12:03 and we are going to go across now live to somewhere on the south coast to Richard Parker, the EV guru from Webfleet, and he is going to tell us all about what Webfleet do and what he's learned in his extensive journey into fleet operations. Richard, all yours.
Thank you. Right. Hopefully, let's see if we can get the first bit right, which is to share my screen. Is it working?
Boom.
Boom.
Yes.
We're all good. Excellent. Morning, everyone out there in the internet world. Really good to be here today. So I want to sort of go through some of the stuff about how we see the interactions between safety and sustainability and their intrinsic link. So they are internet connected, and often we see vehicle improvements directly leading to the benefits of sustainability improvements. And a well-maintained and safe fleet, just on the technical issue on my side, bear with me, there we go. And a well-maintained, safely operated vehicle inherently contributes to sustainability by reducing the likelihood of accidents, which in turn minimizes material waste, costly repairs, and the need for new vehicle production. And furthermore, safe driving practices directly translate to more sustainable operations. For example, right, managing driving behaviors such as speeding and harsh braking reduce the risk of accidents. We've already said that. But they also significantly, importantly, boost fuel economy and reduce CO2 emissions as a result. So by encouraging smoother and more efficient driving, fleets reduce their carbon footprint, the fuel costs, and they demonstrate how enhanced safety directly supports environmental sustainability. So, but what does lead to an increasing safety risk? Well, quite often it's pressure. It's pressure on the fleet manager and it's pressure on the driver to be productive. So from a driver's perspective, this could be very tight delivery timescales or service levels to customers. It might be traffic causing delays, putting them behind on the working day. And if they have an electric vehicle, it could be that getting the vehicle charged hasn't gone according to plan. So that causes stress. It could be that the vehicle isn't fit for purpose or is poorly spec'd from an equipment perspective. It could also be any number of things that are also related to their personal lives, including sleep deprivation. So being in a work vehicle, often on your own, can give the driver plenty of time for that stress to build up by thinking about all these things going around in the mind. And a deteriorated state of well-being of any employee is detrimental to the performance of a business. But for a driver, a lack of concentration or of distraction because of well-being can have significant consequences out on the road. From a fleet manager's perspective, it's often competing priorities. On the one hand, you have an obligation to ensure the fleet is well maintained and efficiently run. And there's an obligation to ensure that drivers are safe and fit to drive. And yet other areas of the organization could be asking drivers to get to the destinations in unrealistic timescales or not booking the vehicle in for service because they need it on the road. And it's under these circumstances where there then can be consequences. So, but are companies actually aware of the stress levels of drivers? And more importantly, are they addressing the well-being of drivers? Earlier this year, we produced a road safety report in which 200 fleets were surveyed. And in that survey, 71% of HGV operators reported high or moderate levels of stress in their driver base, compared to only 54% in LCV operators. However, I would still say that still over half of the LCV operators are expressing high levels of impact of stress. But interestingly, though, 96% of all the HGV operators surveyed had a formal process to support mental well-being, compared to only 67% of LCV operators. Now, maybe this is something to do with the levels of regulation in the HGV industry, but either way, it demonstrates perhaps that there is significant room for improvement in the LCV space when it comes to looking after driver well-being. Now, at the top right-hand side, you'll see a QR code. If you're interested in downloading the full report, please scan that QR code now. I'll give you sort of 10 seconds just to do it. I will put it up again at the end for anyone who misses it before I move on. Okay. So we've covered off in the previous slide what can lead to a decreased level of safety. So I'm not going to go through each of these areas here, but what is really important is to understand how you become aware of these risks and what action you take to address them. As a data company, the visible insights we see from drivers under pressure are typically speeding, harsh acceleration, harsh braking, and generally erratic driving. The behaviours result in significantly increased fuel usage, greater wear and tear on tyres and vehicle parts such as brakes, and of course then accidents, we've already said. And as I've already established, that these have environmental, financial, operational, and importantly, personal impact on individuals. So telematics produces insights in a way that make it easier for fleet operators to take action in the appropriate areas. For example, this is the Webfleet driver behaviour dashboard, which give both a high-level overview to driver risk, as well as a much more detailed analysis. Both of these enable quick identification of where driver risk lies within the fleets. Now, in some instances, when this data is available, because it is data and at the end it needs action taken from it, we observe a lot of fleets going out to drivers and simply delivering a message of stop speeding or stop braking so hard. And that often doesn't translate to resolving the problem. Some of our most successful customers in getting great driver behavior is actually using the data to ask, why are they speeding, or why are we seeing this behavior in harsh braking? And in these instances, understanding the root cause has led to much better outcomes for both the driver and for the business. Often the root cause is nothing to do with the driver themselves, but more about what is being asked of them. So, and we also recognize that driver behavior insights can take time in the working day to go through and really look at and analyze. And a working day for someone where it is likely that the person's role is not the fleet manager, yet they have some accountability for driver behavior, will always be the thing that then falls perhaps to the bottom of the pile. So in these instances, the frequency of use or even the time available to review can be really, really limited. And that's why we're using the evolvement of AI to try and help get behavior insights at the fingertips of those who need it quickly and easily. So we've recently launched our Fleet Advisor AI tool that even those unfamiliar with the Webfleet platform on a day-to-day basis are able to extract driver behavior insights to help them manage the risks associated with the vehicles and the drivers under their remit. Okay, so we've covered off those less safety. So what happens to pressure and stress and safety when you introduce zero emission vehicles into the mix? Well, if done poorly, it can lead to inappropriate infrastructure setup, drivers' first experience of an EV potentially being a stressful one, and then even going as far as losing faith in the vehicle. It can also lead to wasted EV assets that sit stationary because there isn't been the power considerations for the vehicles. Leads to revenue losses potentially due to drops in productivity and increased costs through needing either temporary vehicles or, at worst case, potentially attrition of staff. So this is one of the reasons and the background to it, why we have invested and why some of the guys on this webinar are with us today, is why I've invested and continue to invest in our EV services platform. which is a network of fully integrated partners and services relevant to the transition to electric vehicles, covering everything from initial planning and building of the business case, through infrastructure deployment, to managing EV route planning with charging needs. We have integrations which enable all your charging infrastructure to be visible in the same platform as your vehicles, so you know what's going on both sides of the coin. And for the very complex requirements, we have full dynamic charger optimization. All of this makes the transition to zero-emission vehicles easier because the key components of data move seamlessly between the various providers, so you can continue focusing on operating the core business that you run. So by having these components working well, it also means that drivers won't have undue stress placed upon them when they're operating the EVs on behalf of your business. Then when it comes to sustainability, we have the insights that organizations need in the current climate, whether that is certified CO2 reporting to measure and track your carbon footprint and showcasing how improvement projects are making a difference, or when you have transitioned, knowing that your vehicles are going to keep being productive through energy consumption data, charging information, alerts for critical EV-related situations, direct driver feedback specifically for EVs, or e-learning modules directly linked to driving behavior performance. All of these insights that can be brought forward will give you actionable fleet information to keep your new EVs productive for the business. So a couple of slides ago, I talked about the EV services platform and how we have invested heavily in building integrated partnerships for the EV transition. In the, as John already said, in the third part of today's webinar with the panel, we're going to have a conversation with the names that you see here on the screen to bring to life why collaboration is so important and how we are helping to make things just a little bit easier when it comes to transition. But before we move to that panel, I would like to introduce Nick Rogers from Eurora. Eurora have been a transport management system partner of Webfleet for a number of years, and I've asked Nick to join us today as he's been working on a number of key topics related to sustainability, where integration between the TMS and the telematic data are key. So I'm just going to put up the, so thank you, that's the end of my presentation. I'm just going to put up that QR code for a few seconds before I stop sharing and hand over to Nick.
Thanks, Richard. And
we'll
TMS
make it available later as well. Obviously.
Good man. TMS, Transport Management System, for those who aren't familiar.
Before
with
Mr. Kirby says it, I did say Transport Management System first. I said it first before I did TMS. We know the rules.
Now, Martin Reeves has raised his hand. If you want to go to the toilet, Martin, please feel free to do so. If you've got a question, can you stick it in the Q&A box? If you've got a general chat thing, then for now, if you could put that in the chat box or send me a private message, that would be marvellous. Before we go now to Nick. Nick, all yours.
Perfect. Thank you. Just checking you can see my my screen okay?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Anyone think I work in technology? So just a brief agenda as to what I'm going to cover today. I appreciate probably want to know who we are. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do and the pedigree of the business and obviously the relationship with Webfleet. And then my brief is to cover off specifically some real world scope 3 emissions and reporting. So some of the challenges that our customers face today. And then talking about the operational challenges around planning. And that will cover current combustion engine planning and also what the future looks like. Well, what the current view of EV job planning is, and then what the future is looking like. So I'm going to start off by just giving you a brief overview of who we are. I don't want to labour the point too much, but it kind of links back into what Richard's covered around this ecosystem. And whereas Richard referenced an ecosystem, I like to call it the best of breed. So this is where providers are able to be experts in their field, but also have the integration capabilities to put these components together. So for example, Webfleet is best of breed in terms of telematics. You've got partners like that we deal with, people like Sage and Xera, who are expert in accounting. So we would never ever want to dip into that kind of technology and software writing. So TMS is an abbreviation for Transport Management Software. And in terms of our history, we started the business in 2020. And it was actually after an acquisition within our industry that very much opened up a gap in the market. And it was quite a simple formula. But the formula was to provide cloud-based technology, so modern cloud-based technology, backed up by good, honest customer service, which seemed to be very, very lacking within our industry. And when I say good modern technology, the fact that there's only 2 or 3 providers in the UK currently who actually provide what we call true cloud transport software, which again, in the telematics world, the majority of providers would be a cloud offering. So the reason why I wanted just to kind of give you an idea of who we are and the background to what we do is we've got huge expertise within Webfleet and what we've done previously with Webfleet. So we're trying to provide cutting edge integration, not just with Webfleet, but all the partners that we work with. And it's this general DNA of trying to do the absolute best job for our partners and also obviously our clients, and having an ethos of respectfully challenging them and pushing them to get the most out of the solutions that we provide. Now, in terms of the pedigree, we're experts in the full supply chain. Now, what that actually means is it's not just transport software that we provide. We also can provide services around warehouse management and procuring that for our customers because we have warehouse expertise. And it also links in towards the part of the presentation around planning, that we have expertise in advanced automatic planning or route optimization, as you may know it. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is come to the market and be a disruptor for our competitors, to bring them up to a standard, because the standard of technology has been lacking. And ultimately, we're trying to work towards the future. We're trying to take some of the concepts of today and really work with partners and customers to get most value out of the technology that we either recommend or supply. Now, one of the things that makes us very, very different is what everybody is now experiencing in their personal lives, which is when you order from an Amazon or an online store or anything like that, within the retail world, we've now come to brand it as the DPD effect, but we very much expect to get visibility and notifications on deliveries. So I'll tell you a little bit more about what we do, but this is where we've become to be a bit of a specialist. Because what we're trying to do is allow our clients to get closer to their customers. And when I say closer, our clients can go into a room with their customers and actually offer to configure their delivery experience, which is becoming a real key driver. Now, you might say, well, what's this got to do with sustainability and safety and all these other things? But actually, just because we're digitizing everything, the information that we're still gathering can all very much link to safety, whether it's through risk assessments or through other data that we're capturing on behalf of our clients and making that visible. So this DPD effect is becoming very, very prominent within our industry, and we're using that to give that transparency across the board. So generally, in terms of transport software, what are the benefits? So again, we've just mentioned this customer delivery experience. Really, what we're doing is we're trying to increase revenue and reduce any kind of admin inefficiencies. That's ultimately because it's a job handling system. That's ultimately what it is. But again, we have elements of compliance and trying to heighten safety, whether that's through vehicle checks or, again, capturing risk assessments or through other means of mobile forms and other data that our customer needs to capture. And again, very important, because we're cloud-based, we hold a very, very high level of security. So in terms of transport software, in terms of what does that actually look like, what is it? It's broken down into these images here. So it's an order handling system at the end of the day. That means that we get jobs into a system, we plan them, we execute them, so we get them out to a driver. That's obviously an electronic piece, then right through to obviously invoice and the debrief and reporting. Now, for the purposes of this session, I'm going to concentrate on 2 parts of this flow diagram, which is the execution, which is where scope 3 reporting comes in, and some of the safety aspects. And I'm also going to touch on planning. But one theme I would like to make sure that we're not just, you've seen probably some truck images all the way through this. I would just like to reiterate that this, just because it's called transport management software, it doesn't mean it's for trucks only or just for transport businesses. A transport operation can be couriers. It could be a furniture manufacturer who has a delivery fleet. It really doesn't matter. We've got clients who are service-related businesses who run, a fleet of vans. The point about all of this, that is a transport operation. So our software is versatile enough to be able to help a wide range of businesses. So I just wanted to clarify that. So before I get into the kind of two key points or what my brief was, the current Webfleet integration that we have, where I spoke before around working with partners and getting the most out of this ecosystem, is we've had a long-standing partnership with Webfleet. And there was a couple of reasons as to why we created the integration that we did. Number one, Webfleet has been pioneering safety and fuel efficiency for a long, long time, and is absolutely at the head of the EV, the technology available to EVs. So again, going back to this best of breed, we don't want to start recreating technology that someone else is already absolutely cutting edge at. So we integrate with Webfleet to get strong, unique truck-based and other vehicle type-based ETAs back into our system to not only cover that customer service element, but also to go back to where Richard was talking about the actual driver behavior and things like fatigue and actually the fact that having a good ETA displayed to the driver, it relaxes them. There's a better driving standard. There's less incidents as a result of it, but also the byproduct is we're giving great data to the customer, and they're seeing exactly when their engineer is arriving or when they're receiving their delivery or whatever the business is doing. So ultimately, one of the byproducts of being able to integrate with Webfleet from a job perspective and getting ETAs back and getting data running through Webfleet is we get the tracking data. So we get things which is going to build into the scope 3 emissions that I'm going to talk to you about in a second. But also it's this active driver feedback, whether that's on combustion engine vehicles or EV vehicles. Webfleet proactively gives that feedback back to the driver in real time, which again has a huge effect on the immediate driving style. So there's some of the reasons why we use Webfleet's technology and have an integration with them, which very nicely goes into the part of the presentation that is about scope 3 emissions. So my brief was to discuss topics, not because obviously what's happening at the moment, especially around EVs and this transition, and obviously topics around decarbonisation. There's a lot of anxiety around that. It's a big thing that's going to happen over the next few years, but we've still got to address some of the challenges now. And I think as a business, what we did when I've had conversations with some of the people on the panel today, is that probably 12 months ago, we weren't talking about these kind of things, but actually things have changed so quickly that we need to be at the forefront. And these are affecting our clients now. So we want to be able to talk about some of the current things, but also acknowledging that there's a big plan for the future. So in terms of scope 3 emissions, again, just going back to the drawing board, these are all the indirect greenhouse gas emissions that occur in a company's value chain, both upstream and downstream, but are not directly owned or controlled by the reporting business. So what's the challenge here? And what do we do to tackle this? So one of the big challenges is we see it with our clients, that we've got very, very inaccurate reporting currently, even though we can report on emissions. Actually reporting specific to a customer and the customer's jobs that have been completed by that partner or that subcontractor or that supplier, it's very, very difficult. It's extremely time consuming. It's sort of half a day's work for a lot of the clients that come to us with this issue. And there's a lot of questions around how we tackle this. And again, you may argue that there's cracks in what we do, but what we're trying to do is take real data, real solid data from the likes of telematics. So I'm going to share with you what we've created for our customers to be able to help with these current scope 3 emission challenges today. So I've mentioned about integrating with Webfleet. Obviously, that's from a job perspective, but quite critically, because we integrate with Webfleet, we're gleaning a lot of the telematics and tracking data. And telematics is real-time data. It's the closest thing to the truest data that we can get hold of. The problem with telematics is they don't know which customer is doing which job, whereas we do. So what we're looking to do here is take real data. So how many miles have been traveled, how many emissions have been emitted into the atmosphere on this customer's jobs, and very quickly reporting on that. So we've created a Webfleet emission report, which allows us to do that. So obviously it has to be run after the event. It's very much around actual data. And what we're trying to cover here, again, going one step further in everything that we do, is being able for a client to run over a date range, or if the customer's requested a specific date range of data, that a customer can run that data on that customer and give them something like in the example here. So they give them the number of jobs that they've completed and the actual emissions emitted based on actual data that's been captured from the telematics. And in doing that, we can then emit the CO2 results as a result of it. So what we're doing here is combining data. And this is why this ecosystem, again, going back to what I said, the best of breed and Richard's reference, is why combining all this data is so important. The output for the customer is just so quick and so simple. But actually, this is probably the most accurate data they can get hold of. Now, again, we've gone one step further because, again, a lot of our clients are involved with other associations, whether it's people like FORS. So we're also breaking these emissions down to give the NOx and the PM10. So again, just thinking that one step ahead with everything that we are doing. So these scope 3 emissions are very current. They're challenges we see every day with our clients right now. And what we've put together is the closest thing to accurate data to be able to give real data for our customers to run it for their customers. Okay. So that completes the kind of scope 3 emissions in terms of what we're doing. And I want to move on to, because I appreciate, obviously, I've probably only got a couple of minutes left in terms of my slot, in terms of looking at planning. So within the TMS, obviously, there are methods of planning, and you probably have heard of things like route optimization. Mm-hmm. We've got algorithms being banded around at the moment, which are being branded as AI. So again, this kind of technology has become very prominent once again. And what's ultimately out there at the moment is it's very much a view that you have to start at one location, do 8 radial deliveries and come back to one location. But automatic job planning has advanced massively since then. It can handle various types of jobs, which previously was illogical to these kind of algorithms. And now what we're seeing is that there is the emergence of how do we then plan EV vehicles. So route optimization and route planning, again, links back into safety and efficiency savings. Typically with safety, it's things like accommodating the working time directive, it's drivers' hours, shift patterns, again, all legislative initiatives. And ultimately, we're looking at planning versus actual execution with technology, and that is complemented by obviously the Webfleet platform in the background. So going into automatic planning, so it's historically, people think it's a planning tool that just spits results out straight away, when actually it's more of a scratch pad. There is always going to be an element of an operator needing to amend the sort of last 10%. But what's going to be interesting for the future is, because right now we can accommodate EVs, but it's very, very lateral. We're only able to kind of pick a figure out the air based on what a manufacturer can say an EV vehicle can do. And let's say it can do 280 miles. Well, we're being very reserved here and thinking, well, we don't really understand what the potential effects on the battery are. Let's stick 180 miles in. So right now, we could be very, very inefficient when it comes to kind of this automatic planning. And that's where, again, bringing back this ecosystem with partners like DYNAMON, where they're gathering data on what actually when we're looking at the conditions that affect battery range, we've got to look at things like trending data to get better data into the databases so that the algorithms can work even better. And when I talk about better data, we don't know if tomorrow is going to be wet and windy. We don't know if it's going to be sunny. We don't know what the conditions could be. But what we can do, very similar to what Webfleet used to do with the traffic, and look at trending data when it comes to times of the day, days of the week, weeks of the year, when you've got spikes in traffic. We need to get clever with getting trending data. And yeah, there'll be some tolerances with all of that, but it's going to be massively critical when we're looking at planning tools. And let's say we're planning in April. Planning in April is going to be different to planning in June to planning in November and December. And this, obviously, from a safety perspective, is really then going to assist in range anxiety, which Richard has mentioned previously. So I think where this could potentially go, it clearly identifies that partners and the ecosystem are so critical in all of this. And it's quite an exciting place to be in terms of planning advancing. But also we're trying to assist with challenges, again going back to scope 3 emissions, but also trying to assist with the future and how businesses can become as efficient as possible and not have the concern about planning or how technology isn't working right now for them. So that was my brief on scope 3 emissions and the planning and what the future potentially looks like for planning. So I'm just going to summarize that very quickly. So I know we've covered probably a couple of things of those already, but how critical it is to choose a forward-thinking partner, with a forward-thinking attitude to solving problems today, whilst we're still looking at the future. We've got solutions around scope 3 emissions that save time and that are actually accurate, and how planning for combustion engine fleets and EV is developing. And that's a really, really interesting space to be part of. And how important that ecosystem is with the partners that we've mentioned today, and obviously the partners on the panel and the rest of the kind of the Webfleet ecosystem. So hopefully I've been to time, and that's my presentation. So obviously let me know if there's any questions, and obviously there'll be the panel session later on, and I'll hand back.
Bless you, Nick. That was superb, very comprehensive and much appreciated. Bang on time, so you can stay. Now then, it's time for the panel session. And so we're going to have a couple of people who were invited to be on the panel join us. Angus Webb, the Chief Exec at DYNAMON, and Niall Riddell, otherwise known as Rod, for being hit by lightning twice. But anyway, that just is a private joke, which is great. And they're going to come and talk about the big stuff. So DYNAMON talking about infrastructure and big trucks and all that stuff, and Neil talking about the driver experience and what it's like to work in a fleet and to work with different fuel types. But we've got an interloper who's begged to come on here because he hasn't got any friends at all. Sam Clark from the EV Cafe and GridServe. Now, it's entirely up to you guys. This is your webinar. Do we promote him to be a panelist or do we give him the hoof? Entirely up to you guys. What do you think? Paul's saying no, not so. Richard, your thoughts?
Yeah, come on. Let's let Paul give him a hard time, because Paul is the moderator, so you can give Sam a hard time for a change.
Right, I've promoted him to panelist. Let's see what happens. Right, in the meantime, Richard, whilst you're on the camera there, opening question. Businesses, big business gets telematics. They understand that we're running at scale.
Yeah.
And so we need to manage our assets. As you get through the fleet hierarchy, if you like, down to the medium and smaller businesses, do they get the benefits of telematics and data and actionable insights, or is that still work to be done?
No, I think anybody who's bought Webfleet is buying it because actually we are known for the driver behavior side of it. You're invested in your organization already. Are they there on the transition bit? I think there's a long way to go. And I honestly think they will do it when they're forced to do it for a lot of those organizations, because they are time poor, they are resource poor, and small businesses, the MD may be fulfilling a number of different roles in the organization because of the structure. So it's true to say a lot of our smaller customers are probably not yet engaged in a way that they will need to be in the coming years, if we're being truthful about it. That said, we go through a lot of resellers. A lot of our business is done through resellers, and the encouraging thing is that all of them are kind of on board. So that next tier, if you like, is starting to have that conversation with their customers who are smaller. So that is really encouraging, and that's been a real uptick in 2025. Actually, it's almost like an alarm bell has gone off somewhere. And things are starting. So that's really encouraging, in that size of organization.
Good. I want to go to Nick and talk about Scope 3 emissions, because it dawned on me as you were speaking, Nick, that if we all managed our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, the stuff we do and the stuff we're responsible for, then you wouldn't need to worry about Scope 3 emissions. Am I right in thinking that?
Well, the problem is that within transport especially, you've got huge organizations now that have got green initiatives, and they're in a really difficult position where they're ultimately, their operation requires to use their partners or their suppliers or whatever else to cover that element of transport, because either it's financial, it's financially beneficial, or they simply they can't cope with it, or they don't have the infrastructure. So the problem is that in order for them to achieve their green initiatives, they're reliant on the partners that they're using, or whoever they're using, to be able just to feed, to be able to report on this. The problem is a lot of people are not equipped to report on it. So it's a really difficult one, because each business should be responsible for their own emitting those emissions. But actually within that whole value chain, you can't get away from it. Everybody's got to be responsible, and they're reliant on this data coming from this third party. And I think one of the main issues that we have right now is, whilst I have a client, I can visualize it now. It's a big supermarket who asked for this data, and he ringing various people around him to say, how do I get this data? I've got Webfleet, I've got this, I've got that. But he physically actually could not attribute what emissions were actually emitted to the work they did. And it's so inaccurate, and it's almost irresponsible. So all we're trying to do by giving them these tools is not to say that this is the silver bullet. It's just to be able to say, look, we're actually giving you real data. It's based on what we're actually doing for you. It's the most responsible thing we do. But it's absolutely imperative that they are responsible for that, but also within that whole value chain that they're responsible for it as well. So it's a really, really tough thing, but it's become very, very prominent right now, and it's not only from a time saving, but it can be quite complicated, especially with different vehicle types and things like that. So there's a lot of calculation that goes into all of this.
Thank you, Nick. Richard's got his hand in the air like he just don't care what you got.
I just don't care. Yeah, I just want to put a bit of context around, because it's a really good question, John, and it kind of links to the first question as well, in so much as if you look at the construction industry, so as a whole, and you think about the typical names that you were all familiar with at the top of the chain, but 93% of emissions for the construction industry sit under Scope 3 emissions for those organizations. For retail, for beverage, it's actually at 83%. So whilst they're required to do the reporting, actually much of what they're contributing to the carbon footprint sits absolutely and heavily in that supply chain. And to Nick's point, there's some actually quite small family operators that are suppliers into these organizations that haven't quite started and are suddenly being dragged quite unprepared to doing stuff that they're not familiar or experts in doing.
True. Right. I'm going to ask one of your questions now. Lee Jackson, stand by. You're about to get a name check. But Paul, once I've asked this question, and it's to Angus, would you have a think about a question for Niall at Paua about the driver experience in the real world of what it's like to live with improved systems and better customer experience? Lee Jackson's asked a question, Angus. He says, data, data, data. Now, that I learned today is an epizoosis. So where you say three things in a row, That's an epizoosis. So mayday, mayday, mayday. Hello, hello, hello. Data, data, data. There you are. It's a learning experience today. Anyway, he says, how do you ensure that the data is accurate and address false positives that may affect your results? Lee, I don't know anybody who can answer Lee's question better than Angus Webb. Go.
A really good question. I mean, I think I will context my answer in the sense of decarbonisation is happening for a number of different reasons. Governments are mandating it, so OEMs are having to sell a certain proportion of vehicles which are either electric or reduce their CO2 emissions. Customers are demanding fleets to do it, and shareholders of fleets, maybe managing director or whatever, is saying we're going to do it by 2030 or whatever that may be. If you're a fleet, a public sector fleet, like a water company or whatever. So the pressure to decarbonize is real, but knowing where to start and how to deliver on it in a cost-effective manner that actually works for your business is a real massive challenge. And that's where you need to do the planning and you need to have the data. You need to there's a lot of homework that needs to be done. And a big part of that is data. And doing that homework is not easy, unfortunately. That's why I have a business called DYNAMON that does that homework for you. But getting accurate data means that you get accurate answers. So if you need to know what you do with your operation, a lot of companies don't really intuitively know what they do, and I don't mean that in a condescending manner. It's just they don't. They think that they've got certain driving behavior, but actually, when you look at the data, you see something very different. We work in van, we work in truck, we work in public sector, public transport, waste collection, all sorts of area. And it's particularly evident in the truck world because people think you can't electrify a truck operation because they just don't have the range. When we actually look at the data, it's possible. It's possible to electrify a lot of it. And yes, it's going to be hard. And in the future, we're going to, as we electrify more and more of an operation, you're going to start to hit barriers. But today, we see tons of opportunity. But you have to do the planning. You have to look at the routes. And we're attending this webinar with Webfleet. Webfleet are a brilliant telematics company that collect high quality data and make that data available very easily for their customers to send to the likes of a DYNAMON to analyze it. So having a good telematics or TMS partner that enables you to generate good quality data and then make it available for third parties to analyze is really important. You put the right data in, good quality data in, you get very good quality answers out at the other end.
And that speaks so beautifully of the collaboration that goes on between the various parties in this attempt to decarbonize and keep people safe. So thank you for that, Angus. I'm joined by the legend, 3 times Guinness World Record holder, Sam Clark. Sam, question for Neil, if you would.
3 so far, yes. But thank you. Yeah, thank you for the usurper being involved in the panel. It's a privilege actually, because it's really interesting to listen to everybody's contributions and my little world of EHGV. All of this matters, and so it's really interesting to get the flavour, which is a nice segue into Neil. I know Paul had to go off camera. It looks like he has another court appearance or something. But Neil, for you, I'm curious. I've noticed on the chat there's loads of things that people suggested I ask you, but I'm going to do it myself and ask, how does roaming impact all of this, and how does it fit in? There's areas that have been discussed about experience and safety and in-cab notifications, and then all the work you do in the roaming. How does all of that knit in your world and stitches with Nick and Angus and Richard and everybody else?
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Sam, for the 3 times world record holder. And maybe some more question. So the piece I'm really interested in here is obviously the data element, but then how does that play back into safety? So one of the things that we've now got access to, having connected with about 45 different charge point operators, is lots of data on where the chargers are and when they're available, which enables us to feed that back into the machine and go, actually, how do we give DYNAMON a load of data so that they can help someone decide which vehicles to switch from diesel to electric? How do we then feed some data back into Nick and go, hey, Nick, these are all the chargers that are on the route that the driver might be driving. How do we optimize that charging experience? But if you dig through the heart of that, what we're trying to achieve is a better driver experience. Really what we're trying to focus on there is that idea that the guy is in the vehicle to deliver parcels, to fix boilers, to do a job. They don't want to focus on charging. Charging is actually nothing that they care about at all. It's something they have to do as part of their operational performance. So how do we make it really simple, give them peace of mind that when they pull up for a break or for their lunch or whatever other reason they're pulling up for, they can plug in, charge, get the experience they want, and then move back on the road. I guess one of the other areas that we've received some feedback on, and I'm a bit nervous about, is this idea of pushing more data into the driver whilst they're doing their job. You're in the cab, you're there for a purpose, but if you're getting constantly shot messages, you've probably got your boss chasing you because you're behind on your deliveries or you're not fixed the boiler the way it should have been done. But if you're getting fed messages say, oh, charge on the left, charge on the right, charge on the left, charge on the right, it might not actually be that positive for the driver's experience. We know that regular notifications on your phone distract you. So how do we ensure that we get that right kind of in-cab experience? So that's something that's quite interesting to us because we don't do a lot inside the vehicle right now. We have people who ask whether we should and how we might do it. But at the moment, it's generally something which we shied away from on the basis that that distraction element feels like perhaps the wrong direction of travel.
That's a really interesting point, Neil, and I want to pick that up with Richard. Richard, you have in-vehicle displays which provide information to the driver, but they do it in a way which is not intrusive. It's quite simple to understand. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, typically it would sit within, if you're navigating using the navigation that we provide, it sits within that kind of format. So it's part of the overall as opposed to a separate interaction that suddenly comes along and it's something else to bear in mind. But I just want to hook into what Neil has said because it's a really interesting thought because we're looking at active driver feedback at the moment. So traditionally that would be something like stop harsh braking, stop speeding, those type of notifications. We're looking at specifically for EVs because we know that the driver's right foot or their ability to understand the technology can erode the range of the vehicle by up to 40%. And that has a fundamental impact on the productivity of that organization that's hoping that vehicle is going to do. So, Neil, maybe we should have a bit more of a chat about, I wonder if there's something that we can combine your expertise and ours in terms of how that is delivered. So it's a singular and consistent experience for the driver rather than a number of different. So there you go. This webinar's brought out another idea.
There you go. Collaboration.
I think just to add to that, Richard, if you bring it back round to what Angus said around good data going in, good data coming out, we spoke about planning and how EV planning has got to get better. It can't just be a round figure of, well, we'll just do 180 miles. And I think what's interesting is currently notifications on, currently petrol stations on navigation devices are symbols. Now, it's not to say that eventually it will become like that, but where good planning comes in, if you've got better data around range and you plan in, like we do currently, we have to plan in currently tachograph brakes. So that is a legislative thing, but it's on the ePod app. So at the point that they're getting to, because ultimately these guys are always doing jobs when they're out on the road, is it something that we look at that from a planning perspective that we can actually communicate with the driver in a different way that isn't a distraction, but we're actually planning that break in as part of their job and being far more subtle. So again, it's going to this idea of collaboration, but I can see quite a lot of value in that.
I think you're right of all of that as well, because to the work that Sam's doing through the Z and that are we going to have to identify these stops with perhaps different symbols if we're going to still use symbols because of the size of the vehicle and everything else? I think, we're at that very, very early stage of simplistic charging structure at the moment. And it's invariably going to have a lot of variation going forward to accommodate different vehicle types and uses.
Sam.
I was going to say, thanks, John. Yeah, there's a rich vein of different data sets in this virtual room. One other which is going to be prevalent is bookability and reservation, particularly in the commercial sector. And that's a whole nother piece to speak to what Nick just said around how we plan in the charging sessions during people's breaks, whether that be on a tacho break or otherwise. So GridServe, we're developing our own system for that as we speak, and others will be doing the same. And therefore, there's going to be a need for a certain degree of universality, which will happen through the OCPI connections. But yeah, that's a whole nother data set that's going to have to link with all these other ones to make that operation as seamless as possible for the driver.
you've answered a question that Martin Reeves posed in the Q&A section. So Martin, I hope that answers your question. It's absolutely bang on that the data that is created will be used not only for the business, but in terms of planning the infrastructure and the requirements that you have as a driver. Paul, I believe you're back.
I'm back. I am indeed.
Now, you have a question that you want to develop.
Well, so I think we've already touched on the importance of planning and being able to maximize efficiency. And really the question was focused at Neil, because I know in terms of the app that you've developed and kind of a real focus on accuracy of where chargers are and also to the point that they're available or not. You know, you are trying to help productivity, because productivity, we know in the world of vans, is worth money. And actually, it's better to have bookable or identifiable chargers than to turn up and lose time. Because that's the most costly thing. It's even more than the cost of, some would argue, quite expensive public charging. But the reality is that being able to get in and move on is important. How are you guys addressing that at Paua?
It's a fascinating question. I think one of the things that we've observed from historical data is that around about 20% of charge point operators enable a form of booking, and yet something like 0.1 or 0.2% of all sessions are booked. But that's predominantly based on data from cars. And car drivers, you know, we're in this world whereby actually, you know, with the richness of landscape we got of charge point operators, there's lots of ability to pull up, plug in, find chargers, bigger hubs, larger locations, motorway forecourts, it's all there. So we're suddenly in the territory where cars and possibly small vans is relatively easy. You enter the world of larger commercial vehicles, towing vehicles, EHGVs, and suddenly the dynamic changes. And one of the observations we've made is that sometimes it's not really down to the driver. The driver's given predisposed routes. Nick's team has set up a route and what they're going to drive. They tell them where they're going to stop for a scheduled break, and they move them on. So putting that reservation opportunity into the journey is really crucial. And, you know, Sam highlighted that he's building an ecosystem within GridServe to enable that ability to plug in and charge on a fixed time slot. And then you've got all the questions around what if he's late? What are the traffic? Do you make it dynamic? And all the lovely stuff that comes with that. But in essence, the industry as a whole has to tackle collaboratively that question of being able to secure slots, being able to secure time for a driver to get peace of mind. So when they're on the road, they're driving safely to a known location where they can get a charge and then they can get about their job. Because at the end of the day, they don't really care about charging. We care about charging. They don't care about charging. So there's a lot we can do as a group to collaboratively provide the information to the driver and the systems enabled to make it easier for them to do their job.
He's good, you know. He is good, isn't he? Now then, we've got one final question in the Q&A box, which I'm going to pick up. Kirsten Simpson. Simpson, eh? She wants to know, have you got any checklists that you can share about how you stay compliant with checks on drivers? Now, you are logistics gurus. What you got? Silence was the loud response.
Right. We do have solutions, and actually it's for any one customer there are different requirements, so there isn't a singular list. I mean, feel free to reach out to me separately and we can talk about it, but the Webfleet checklist element is configurable at a customer level to include internal, external, additional bits of equipment. So there may be critical bits of equipment that wouldn't normally be recognized as a vehicle check. But that sort of stuff can also be included, and quite critically as well, the checks are timed and presented to the fleet manager so as to know if that check's being done in 1 minute, then it's probably been not done to a standard that is acceptable and things like that. So yeah, there's always ways of creating specific configurable applications that allow a fleet to understand, is that vehicle fit and roadworthy when perhaps it's significantly remote from the fleet manager and out of sight.
Brilliant. Good. We've got 4 minutes left, and I'm going to ask you all to address one question. Do you have a real-world example of how telematics data and actionable insights have delivered on the road more efficient, safer fleets? Let's start with Richard. Just a very quick overview. What you got?
We did, and actually We had real demonstrable results. It was quite a large client. We kept it simple. We got them to stop speeding. Just roll at the speed limit. They saw a 4.5% increase in fuel efficiency, which saved that organization hundreds of thousands of pounds per annum in fuel, and over 1 million kilograms of CO2 were taken out from their existing operating. So it's that every litre saved adds a considerable amount, reduces a significant amount of CO2 that they would have otherwise burnt just by stop speeding. Makes a massive difference.
So speed doesn't just kill people, it kills businesses.
Exactly. And funnily enough, their accidents went down as well.
Wow. Goodness gracious. That's really interesting. Thank you. I appreciate that. Nick, what have you got for us?
I think just building on from Richard's example, is what's interesting for us is as a byproduct of someone implementing software. So getting orders to a driver, it's all around digitization. And just fundamentally, the fact that we integrate with Webfleet means that the use of the devices, especially in the cab, the byproduct of using ePod, navigating using Webfleet, and getting active driver feedback, it just enforces the use. Where if you don't have that kind of integration, it's obviously reliant on a lot of data and a lot of review processes and debriefs with drivers. It's all after the event. So we've got quite a lot of examples where just the byproduct of having the integration forces that use. And we've got, again, I know we're covering in trucks and things like that, but we've got examples where we've seen them present data to us that have increased their MPG by a whole MPG. And we're talking things like 8, 9 MPG to sort of 10 and 11 MPG. It's huge. And again, Rich is right. It's hundreds of thousands per annum for fleets of 50 vehicles, which is, when in haulage especially, margins are very, very tight. These kind of investments in technology, providing they pick the right partners with the best APIs and the almost the best attitude to integrate and collaborate, then these savings are real. They are tangible, real savings that you can get.
Key word for me was attitude. You're right, Nick. If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Neil, what about you?
I'm not going to give you a specific real world example. I'm going to give you an anecdote instead. One of the things that electric vehicles clearly are very good for is high torque, rapid acceleration. So as you're driving down the slip road, like I was at the weekend, you look in your rear view mirror and you see what's coming up behind you. On this occasion, I had a BMW i4. My guess is going to be that he had no telematics or tracking devices, because as soon as I came out onto the motorway, predictably enough, straight across the chevrons into the middle lane, and he shot off in front of the truck ahead of us. So one of the things that I'm really observing is that whilst we've had, 4 or 5 years of early adopters taking on electric vehicles and experiencing a different kind of driving style, we're now getting the mainstream adopters. And with that, unfortunately, we get some idiots. And therefore, we're getting some idiots in cars who are driving very high performance vehicles. And therefore, the safety aspect of handling a more powerful vehicle becomes really crucial. So I'm hoping the BMW i4 did have telematics in their device, and they will be getting some harsh acceleration feedback in the near future.
Thank you, Neil. That may save a life. And finally, Angus, a real world example of where telematics has made a difference.
Well, when you plan your decarbonisation or your electrification, you don't always need the biggest battery, the biggest, chunkiest chargers to electrify your fleet. And we've got a public case study with TfL that we did last year, and we've saved them millions of pounds of capital cost by finding that, looking at the telematics data, they didn't need the biggest battery in all of their vehicles. And we were able to find which vehicles need the big battery, which vehicles can have a smaller battery, where you need the big chargers, where you don't need big chargers, and saved them many millions of pounds on their van operation in London. And that case study is real, published, but that's the case with every customer we work with. So, telematics tells you what you actually do, and therefore you can find a solution which is optimized to your operation, saves you money.
Certainly does. Paul, you're tight as a crab's backside. How do you... So let's link to you.
That's fair.
An example.
So two super quick ones. One, in the planning of where your infrastructure is, you can understand where your vehicles are stopped and you are moving around. So instead of just employing or deploying infrastructure randomly, you know where your vehicles are spending their time, and you can put the charging infrastructure alongside that in your various depots across the country, especially if you're a multi-site operation. And the second thing was a reputational thing. Telematics can identify where a vehicle is at any given time. And I was working with a fleet well, I used to help run it. And we used to get a lot of complaints because we have liveried vehicles, and somebody would say, oh, you know, X, Y, and Z van went past and damaged my vehicle. We could demonstrate that it wasn't there at the time that they suggest it was, and it could not have been a thing. So telematics can actually be super helpful from that perspective. So reputational and deployment of infrastructure.
We've all worked out how Paul's going to get off this speeding charge that he's currently facing by using telematics. I wasn't there, Your Honour. And finally, 3 times Guinness World Record holder Sam Clark. Anything?
I could spend an hour answering this question with both. We're the real world experience.
Of course you could.
My favourite one is Joseph report I used to do, which was the behavioural patterns of drivers based on telemetry, and different coloured patterns said what the drivers are doing. Speaking to Neil's point about hard acceleration, hard braking, aggressive driving, it's incredible what you can see in behavioural patterns as a result of telemetry in a safety environment. So that's the one that springs to mind.
Thank you, my friend. Listen, it's 3 minutes after 1. We're a little over, but I think it was worth it. And what I've discovered today is that there are answers out there. Seek and you shall find. My advice to you would be to find the right people, and it is a people thing. Data, actionable insights, that's all really, really great. But if you don't have the people behind it who have the mindset to make things happen, it is valueless. The people on this panel today and the people who've joined the audience are people who want to make a difference, are making a difference, and they can help you. So thank you all. Richard, Sam, Nick, Neil, Paul, Angus, you've been fantastic. For everybody who's joined, thank you. And we may even come back and do this again. Until next time, thanks a lot and goodbye.
Goodbye.
See you all.